Welcome back. Today we're diving into Chapter 6 using disks and disk images. In this chapter we'll explore how to work with both physical and virtual disk drives on the MEGA65. You'll learn how to create, mount, and manage disk images, plus some great tips on working with the internal 3.5-inch floppy drive. Get ready for another exciting ride through the MEGA65 User's Manual. As always, be sure to check out the companion blog post to this video where you'll be able to find everything in text form and all the links you need. Now, let's jump into the MEGA65 and learn how to manage your disks and disk images. The MEGA65 supports both physical and virtual drives. The built-in 3.5-inch floppy drive is compatible with double-density floppy disks, just like the Commodore 65. You can also attach external legacy drives, such as a 1541 to the IEC port, or modern recreations, such as a Pi 1541 or SD to IEC devices. Besides physical drives, you can access and use virtual.d81 files. The MEGA65 doesn't currently support .d64 files. You'll find most software for the MEGA65 in .d81 format on the file host. When you fire up the MEGA65, the MEGA65 demo disk from the MEGA65.d81 disk image on the SD card was the first thing that was loaded. The MEGA65 will boot this disk image by default, but you can change this in the configuration utility, or you can replace that file with another of the same name. The MEGA65 includes tools to manage the disk images in the freezer and with basic commands, which we'll cover a little bit later. And finally, for those of you who've been with the Commodore since the early days, you'll be happy to know that physical and virtual disk both use the same basic commands you know and love, with some great modern additions and improvements. Now, the MEGA65 can handle multiple drive units simultaneously by assigning a unit number to each drive. By default, the first unit number is 8, either a physical disk inserted in the drive or a virtual disk attached using the freezer. For those familiar with the original Commodore computers, you know that the command load quote, my program, 8, 1 will load software from the default or Unit 8 drive. This drive is connected to the Commodore Serial Bus or IEC. The IEC uses an IEEE 488 serial protocol that provides unit numbers from 0 to 31 for various devices. This protocol reserves unit numbers 8 through 11 for the disk drives. Good news, the MEGA65 follows these standards, and earlier I mentioned that Basic 65 includes modern improvements to make using drives on the MEGA65 easier. For example, if you want to load software from drive 9, use the command DLOAD, open quotations, my-program, close quotations, comma, U9. The U parameter utilizes drive 9. If you omit the U9 parameter, the MEGA65 defaults to Unit 8, as it should. The great thing about the MEGA65 is that it includes both a physical floppy drive and access to virtual disks on the internal SD cards. This can be confusing, so let's see if we can clear this up just a little bit. Unless you have made modifications to the MEGA65 configuration we chatted about in Chapter 4, a virtual disk on the SD card named MEGA65.d81 is the default virtual disk attached to Unit 8. To change this in immediate mode or Basic 65 mode, use the mount command. By default, the floppy disk remains disconnected until you use the mount command. While confusing now, this will make sense by the time we finish this chapter and you learn more about virtual images, floppy disks, freezers, and mount commands to manage our data. In addition to the unit numbers, there are drive numbers for older disk units that contain 2 drives, such as the old Commodore 8050. Because this is extremely rare, I won't cover their use in this series, but check out Chapter 6 in the printed manual for more information. On the other hand, if you're interested in a dual drive, check out this dual drive from Bitbinders. This is a recreation of the 1581 that includes 2 drives. You can get this in either a vertical or horizontal format. Now, if someone has one of those Commodore 8050s lying around and you don't need it, I'd love to test it on my MEGA65. Reach out to me. Before we dive into using virtual disk, let's diverge from the user's guide for a moment to touch on why the MEGA65 defaults to virtual disks rather than the internal 3.5-inch floppy drive. First of all, virtual disks offer a number of advantages. The first one is convenience. Virtual disk images like .d81 and D64 files are stored on SD cards or other media, allowing you to switch between them instantly without physically swapping disks. They're also great for preservation. Since virtual disks are digital files, they protect software originally stored on fragile floppy disks, preventing data loss over time. They're also great because they're faster, have much faster access. Virtual disks provide quicker load times while still emulating retro disk speeds for an authentic experience. And there's the opportunity for larger capacity. Virtual disks can store more data. For instance, a .d81 can hold up to 800 kilobytes compared to a 1541 floppy's measly 170 kilobytes. Virtual disks are great for easy backup and sharing. Virtual disks are simple to backup, copy, and share online, making software distribution and data protection a breeze and hassle-free. The other thing I like about virtual disks is multi-disk management is easier and more seamless. Virtual disks enable seamless switching between multi-disk setups, bypassing the need for physical disk swapping, especially if you have a single floppy drive. Disk images are also better for modern integration. Virtual disks integrate with emulators like Vice or XEMU, streamlining the development and testing process on both emulators and MEGA65 hardware. And then finally, virtual images allow a layer of software compatibility. They support both legacy Commodore software and new MEGA65 programs, giving you the best of retro and modern computer, which is what this channel is all about. Now, when you first power on your MEGA65, it loads the intro disk menu from a .d81 file called MEGA65.d81. This is stored on the SD card. You can modify this default behavior in the MEGA65 configuration utility. And there are 3 ways to manage virtual disks on the MEGA65. First, you can use the freezer menu. Remember that one? You hold the restore key for about 1 second and the freezer pops up. You can also use basic commands like mount. We'll talk more about that later. And as I mentioned earlier, in the MEGA65 configuration utility, where you can change the default D81 boot image. Earlier, we talked about unit numbers. Each MEGA65 drive is assigned a unit number. You can have 2 managed disks at once. The first managed drive is typically set to unit 8 or 10, and the second drive to unit 9 or 11. For simplicity, I recommend sticking with units 8 and 9. More on this concept when we talk about mounting disk images and drives. So you're probably wondering, where do we get these .d81 files? You can create one yourself. We'll learn how to do that a little bit later on, but you'll first want to find disk images full of software, and your first stop is the MEGA65 file host at files.mega65.org. There you can browse, search, and download .d81 disk images. After you download the .d81 image, you can copy it to your Mega SD card using one of these methods. You can manually copy the disk image from your PC to your SD card. You can use M65 Connect to transfer the disk image from your PC to your MEGA65. Or you can use the MEGA65_FTP command line tool to transfer the disk image from your PC to your MEGA65. You've seen the first option in previous videos. We'll explore options 2 and 3 in Chapter 7. Now, the file host is not the only place to find disk image files for the MEGA65. If you are using C64 mode, search for older Commodore 64 titles stored on .d81 disk images. When using the C64 core, search for .d64 disk image files. It's a bit confusing, but this will get easier over time. Just remember, go 64 mode on the MEGA65.d81 files, C64 core .d64 disk image files. Let's use the freezer to get started using disk images. Press the restore key for 1 second. The MEGA65 freezer menu will appear. and display the disk image files on the internal or external SD card. If an external SD card is installed, that will be the default. We talked about that in a previous chapter. There's no way to switch between them in the freezer menu. Select the first managed drive by pressing 0. A disk image browser will appear. On the left side are primary devices and folders. When one of those devices is selected, the contents will appear on the right-hand side of the page. Use the cursor keys to select a disk image in the menu and press return. The image is mounted to the managed drive. If needed, press 1 to perform the same actions for the second managed drive. Remember, you can have 2 disk images mounted at the same time. Press F3 to leave the freezer menu and you can access the disk image. If you want to change the unit numbers from default 8 and 9 identification, do the following. After loading the disk image, return to the main freezer menu. Press either 8 or 9 on the keyboard to toggle the assigned unit number on the first or second managed drive. Now, MEGA65 includes a new command called mount that you can use in lieu of the freezer to mount disk images. This is my preferred way to mount images. You can use this command as part of a basic program or in immediate mode. Here are 2 examples of the command's usage. If you want to mount a disk image to Unit 8, the default, use mount, open quotations, MEGA65.D81, close quotations. If you want to mount a disk image to Unit 9, we're going to use the U argument with the mount command. As in this example, mount, open quotations, MEGA65.D81, close quotations, comma, don't forget that comma, U9. Now we'll check out another use of the mount command in just a little bit, so stay tuned. Now you're probably wondering, how do I create my own disk image? If you need a blank disk image for your own basic programs and data files, you can create one in the freezer menu. Press the restore key for 1 second, the freezer menu will appear. Press either 0 or 1 to select a managed drive to contain the disk image. Cursor down to the new D81DD image option at the top of the left column. A disk image name prompt will appear. Type the name of the disk image no more than 16 characters, but do not include the .d81 extension. Once you hit enter, the new disk image is now created and is available and mounted to the MEGA65 managed drive. Exit the freezer using F3 and verify in immediate mode using the directory command or dir command. More on that dir command later. Unlike the 1980s and 90s, create as many of these disk images as you like because they don't cost a thing and you're not going to forget and drop these on a speaker and they're going to get erased later on down the line. Now, new to the MEGA65 is the ability to create folders on an SD card. These folders will help you keep things organized as you start your collection of disk images. For instance, you may want all your games in a folder called, you guessed it, games, or even break that down to the types of games such as adventure or action or strategy. There are 2 ways to create subdirectories on an SD card. You can manually create them on the SD card using your PC, or you can use the Ethernet file transfer tool, which we'll discuss in Chapter 7. Just remember, only one subdirectory. You can't go any deeper than one subdirectory from the root directory of your SD card. Earlier, you saw the use of the freezer menu to display subdirectories. To make subdirectories easy to identify, you'll note that their name begins with the / character. MEGA65 also includes the chdir command. I'll just call it change directory command. And this does exactly what it says. It changes the directories on the SD card. You can use this command in either immediate or in basic programming mode. Here's an example that will change directories and mount a disk image located in a subdirectory. So we're going to change directory to open quotation demos, close quotations, comma, U12. That will now move the marker into the demo subdirectory on the SD card. And then we're going to use the command mount open quotations, and then I've got a really cool demo, the Xanadu PV.D81 close quotations, and then hit enter. That disk image is now mounted. And by the way, that Xanadu demo is awesome. Run to the file host now and download it. It's a great example of what you can accomplish in assembly and Basic 65. I even produced a video about this demo. You can check it out in the video description below. All right, one of the great features of the MEGA65 is that internal 3.5-inch floppy disk drive. Let's learn how to use that. To maintain the intent of the Commodore 65, the MEGA65 includes, as I mentioned, that wonderful physical 3.5-inch floppy disk drive. For that true retro 8-bit experience, you can use this drive with all of its nostalgic sounds and quirks. There are even software box sets available for the MEGA65 that include the software on both SD card and 3.5-inch floppy. It's way cool. I'll link to my unboxing of 2 titles down below in the video description. But before you can use the 3.5-inch floppy, we need to mount it. There are 2 ways to do this, and that's what we'll talk about next. Mounting the physical 3.5-inch floppy disk drive using the freezer menu is similar to the process used to mount disk images, as you'll see in these steps. Press restore key for 1 second. The MEGA65 freezer menu will again appear. Select the first managed drive by pressing 0. Use the cursor down key to select internal 3.5-inch and press return. The physical 3.5-inch floppy disk is now mounted to the first managed disk device and to the default unit 8. If you need to change the unit number, press the 8 key to cycle between units 8 and 10. Now, just a note, the internal 3.5-inch disk drive can only be mounted to the first managed drive with unit numbers 8 or 10. It cannot be 9 or 11. Okay, insert a disk and try the dir command. If you receive an error, the disk might not be formatted. We'll take care of that a little bit later. Earlier, we talked about how to use the mount command in immediate mode and basic programs to mount an SD card. When mounting an SD card, you use arguments after the command to mount the internal 3.5-inch floppy. Use the command mount without arguments to assign the internal drive to unit 8. There are currently no arguments to mount the drive to unit 10. Use the freezer menu if you need that option. Now, if we're going to talk about disk drives, we need to talk about a couple of different formats. There are both double density and high density disks available. The MEGA65's internal floppy uses double density or DD floppy disks. Floppy disks haven't been manufactured since around 2011, but there are still plenty of stock available. If you're looking for disks, take a look at floppydisk.com. They specialize in finding old pallets and leftover stock. They even have an Amazon store, and I'll link to them down below. Now, double density floppy disks are hard to find, and you are more likely to find high density disks. These are not compatible with the MEGA65 drive by default, but there is a trick. On the left-hand side of a high density disk, you'll find a cutout. This is not the same cutout found on the right-hand side that is used to write protect a disk. Placing a piece of tape over this cutout, and you must cover both sides for this trick to work, will cause the MEGA65 to think that you have inserted a double density disk into the drive. If you've been around Commodore computers for years, you'll remember this old trick. We used to use this back in the day too. Now, disks don't work by default. They first need to be formatted. And we can do this in the physical disk drive. The drive in the MEGA65 emulates the Commodore 1581 drive, a popular Commodore 3.5-inch drive unit. You can use this drive to format a disk with the following steps. And just a reminder, formatting a disk erases all content. Make sure you have a blank disk or that you really want to remove the contents of a disk that has already been formatted before you start this process. The first thing we do is we mount the disk using either the freezer menu or the mount command. Now, we discussed both of these options earlier, so feel free to rewind if you need to go back and review those concepts. Next thing you want to do is insert the double density or high density with a piece of tape on it disk into the 3.5-inch floppy on the right-hand side of the MEGA65. Use the command format and name the disk. For instance, you may want to use open quotations, my disk, close quotations, but again, keep it no more than 16 characters. And then you want to follow it by a 2-character ID. And this can be anything of your choosing. So here's an example of that process. Format, open quotations, my disk, close quotations, comma, I for the identifier, 01. Enter yes at the prompt. The disk will take a minute or two to format as it crunches and buzzes through the process. Once formatting is complete, you can use the dir command to verify the format was completed properly. You're now ready to use this disk to save your basic programs. Now on the back of the MEGA65 is an IEC port. Even though the MEGA65 includes an internal 3.5-inch floppy, that doesn't preclude you from using another external drive you may have in your collection, such as a 1541 or a 1581. You can even use a modern Pi 1541, and you can use SD to IEC devices. The MEGA65 really does provide a lot of flexibility for any type of storage device you want to use. The MEGA65 retains the familiar method from older Commodore computers where the first file in a disk directory can be auto-loaded by using the command load, open quotations, asterisk, close quotations, comma 8, comma 1. Most of us have that built into our muscle memory. This loads the first file on the disk and typically runs it with the run command. The asterisk is a wildcard symbol telling the MEGA65 to match the first file in the directory without specifying its name. You can also take advantage of a more advanced auto boot feature introduced with the Commodore 65, where a disk can contain a file named autoboot.c65. If the file exists on the disk and is a valid program, the boot command will automatically load and run it. It is a slick option. As a matter of fact, it's one I could probably spend a whole video on, just talking about how to create your own autoboot.c65 to do all kinds of things automatically when you first start your MEGA65. If that's something you'd be interested in, put that down in the comments down below. Say, hey, retroCombs, I'd like to see a video on that. Now, there are other ways to auto boot. Remember, the configuration utility discussed in Chapter 4 allows the MEGA65 to automatically mount either a disk image or the internal 3.5-inch floppy disk drive during the MEGA65 boot process. When the disk contains that program, the autoboot.c65, the system will automatically load and run the autoboot.c65 program with no user intervention. This auto boot process is how the intro disk works. The file autoboot.c65 is part of the MEGA65.d81 virtual disk image stored on the SD card, which is automatically mounted during startup. Setting up an auto boot disk is a useful feature if you want the MEGA65 to perform specific actions every time it powers up. For example, you can write a short basic program, name it autoboot.c65, and configure your screen and text and colors or assign commands to function keys. Here's a cool trick up the MEGA65 sleeve. It can access the SD card just like a drive. The most important thing to remember is that in these cases, the SD card is assigned to Unit 12. Keep this in mind, and you can use several useful commands to perform interesting operations. Let's take a look at a few. You can use the dir u12 command to list all the contents on the SD card. This allows you to review the contents without activating the freezer menu. This is how I like to access the contents of the SD card when I'm using the MEGA65. Now, some programs are in their native .prg format and are not contained on a disk image. There's no need to move these to a disk image. You can copy the .prg file to the SD card and use a command, DLOAD, open quotation, program name, .prg, close quotations, comma, U12 will load a program directly into MEGA65 memory, where that program name is the name of the program and U12 is the device unit or the SD card. We talked about subdirectories earlier, and you can view them when you use the directory U12 command. To navigate into a directory, use the chdir or change directory, open quotations, the subdirectory name, close quotations, comma, U12. Now, to move from the subdirectory back to the root directory, use the command chdir, and within those quotations, don't put a directory name, but put 2 double dots. Follow that with a comma and a U12. Now, many of you know that the 2 double dots means to move up a level, even in modern devices. Well, it works just the same way on our MEGA65. Now, remember, by default, the mount command does not require the U12 argument. even though it is mounting disk images from the SD card. If you use the U argument when mounting disk images, this argument will set the unit number for the disk image being mounted. Confused yet? It'll all make sense as you use these commands, I promise you. Now, we've used a lot of basic 65 disk operation commands. Let's take a further look at some we've used and some additional commands. And the first one we're going to talk about is displaying the directory listing of a disk using the dir command. Here's a couple of examples. For instance, we can use dir to list the default disk image. We can use dir followed by U9 to list the contents on the Unit 9 image. And there's a new one on the MEGA65, which is dir with a W argument on the end of it. And that enables us to display a long listing, not in a single column, but in 3 columns, so it fills more of the screen and is easier to see more of the contents. Now, Commodore 64 users may remember that loading a directory would overwrite the contents of basic memory. You don't need to worry about that limitation on the MEGA65. You can load and run programs from a disk with the DLOAD and RUN commands. For instance, we could DLOAD quotations cool game and then use the run command to execute the code after it's loaded. Or we could combine the commands and just say, hey, run cool game. Now, not only will you want to load software, you're going to want to save software that maybe you've created in BASIC. You can save the current program in memory to disk with the DSAVE command. So here are a couple examples. We can DSAVE quotations my game, or we can DSAVE quotations my game, comma U9 to save to the Unit 9 device. You can overwrite an existing file with the DSAVE command with the @ option. Now, Commodore 128 and TED series users will be familiar with the use of that @ symbol to replace files. It won't be new to them. Commodore 64, that will be new to you, and as well as VIC-20 users. I can back up an entire disk from one unit to another with the backup command. For instance, backup U8 to U9 will allow me to back up maybe a disk image on Unit 8 to a floppy disk on Unit 9. Again, this is handy for making backups to disk images and copying the contents from a disk image to a physical floppy or vice versa. Yes, you can do that. There's also the copy command, which will copy a file. So I can copy my game to mygame-1. Or I can copy my game, comma U8 to my game, comma U9. The first option copies the file to a new file on the same disk or image, and that second option will copy a file across 2 different disks or images, depending on which devices you've attached to which units. Really handy stuff. You can also rename files using the rename command, and here's an example of that one. Rename my program-v1 to my program-v2. Now, there are times when you're going to want to delete a file, and you use the delete command to do this. So for instance, we may want to delete our junk file, or maybe we want to delete our junk file that's on Unit 9. Basic 65 includes several shortcut commands, so you don't have to type the full command. Some of these will be familiar with folks who've used things like the Epix Fast Loader. Let's go ahead and take a look at these examples. For instance, / is the equivalent of the load command. The up arrow, not the cursor key, but the up arrow next to the asterisk key on your keyboard is the run command. The left arrow, not the left arrow cursor arrow, but the left arrow next to the 1 will save a program. If you type the @ symbol, that'll give you the status of your disk drive. And then finally, if you type the $, that will give you a directory. Now, cool thing is you can combine these shortcuts with the U argument and specify which units you want to act upon. Now, here's a fun example of how I like to use these shortcuts in Unison. Ensure you have a disk or disk image available in the drive. In immediate mode, type the $, and follow that with return. The directory will display. Now, use the up arrow keys to place the cursor at the far left of the program you want to load. Hit the up arrow key and press return. The MEGA65 will ignore everything on the line except the file name and then load and run the program. It's pretty slick. Now, there's more information about each disk operation command in Appendix A, Basic Command Reference. I encourage you to visit those pages to learn even more. All right, that closes Chapter 6 of our MEGA65 User's Guide series. Learning to use drives on the MEGA65 is a crucial skill that will get easier for you over time, I promise. As mentioned, if you need help, reach out to the MEGA65 Discord. There's a ton of folks there that are willing to help you on your MEGA65 journey. And again, don't forget that you can join my Discord by supporting the channel. You can find information at buymeacoffee.com/retrocombs. I also have a MEGA65 channel and a friendly group of retroCombians who are also MEGA65 owners. We'll be happy to help if you're overwhelmed by maybe that larger MEGA65 Discord. Until next time, what are you waiting for? Get out there and download some software from the file host to give your new MEGA65 a good shakedown. And while you're at it, here are 2 additional videos outside of this user's guide series that will teach you even more about the MEGA65. See you in Chapter 7. That's it for me. retroCombs out.